Welcome to Building Better Businesses, an ABA podcast. Learn firsthand from business owners who've built successful ABA businesses. Utilize proven techniques and strategies to help your practice thrive. This is Building Better Businesses, an ABA podcast with Jonathan Mueller.
Matt Cicoria is the producer and host of the Behavioral Observations podcast, downloaded more than 3.5 million times. He's been a BCBA for 20 years. And for the past 15 years, he's consulted with schools and families in private practice through his company, Positive Behavioral Supports. Matt, welcome to the pod.
It's great to be here. Thanks for asking me to chat with you for a little bit.
We were dishing about Wayne's World a little bit ago. I don't know if you remember, Matt, the scene in Wayne's World where they meet their idol, Alice Cooper, for the first time. It's Dana Carvey and Mike Myers. And then like they see Alice Cooper and they get down on their hands and knees and they're like bowing, saying, we're not worthy. We're not worthy. That's how I feel right now. Like I am not worthy, but I am so pumped to have this conversation.
Oh man. Well, that's incredibly humbling. And I might suggest that you, perhaps upgrade your idols there.
Touche. Absolutely.
No, this is a treat. So thanks so much again for inviting me to come talk with you for a little bit. I love talking about behavior analysis and podcasting and everything else, I suppose, in between.
Oh, man. Well, being a great interviewer, Matt, means just being curious. And how did you learn to excel at being curious?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things that came to me naturally. One is that, as behavior analysts, we spend a lot of time talking to families and teachers and stakeholders. And so I think there's a bit of a natural interviewer in all of us in this world. So I think there's just, that's probably the easy answer. But I think in addition to that, there is I'm always the guy sitting in a conference presentation who's kind of asking questions in my head to the person giving the talk, In other words, I'm like, so like, well, how was that study done? Or what is there's, what made you choose this as a particular topic? Or, why didn't you have enough, participants in this, or whatever it might be. So I'm always kind of reacting. I always have this kind of internal monologue going on that's like kind of asking questions. And so when I sat down to, I guess, create the concept of the podcast, I wanted to be conversational. I didn't want it to be like, question, answer. And I also wanted to be such that I got the opportunity to ask those yeah, but questions that I was saying to myself, essentially, when I'm in the audience of, say, like whether it's a conference or on a webinar or something like that, so, and I wanted the audience to be like a fly on the wall. If I pulled someone aside at a conference and had a coffee with them or had a beer with them or something like that, and I was, saying, well, what about this? Well, I tried that and this didn't work. So what do you think about that? Or what do you think is going on here? Or I'm stuck. And this is what's going on with me and, or this case or what have you. And just kind of, I guess riffing along those lines. And again, with the audience being, kind of, flies on the wall to kind of hear that conversation. So that's the kind of, I just kind of put myself in the place of just about any audience member, I suppose, in a given venue.
It really resonates. Going to conferences is one of the things that absolutely fills my bucket, right? Reconnecting with people whom I haven't seen in a long time, or meeting new people. And what I've always loved about conferences is what you just described, is being able to have a side conversation for 15, 20 minutes or 2 hours, whatever it is, and get to know that person and what motivates them really deeply. So that's really neat. But let me ask, so if you're in a big conference room, right, like the keynote presentation, where do you sit? Are you one to go sit in the very front? Do you sit in the back, somewhere in between?
Oh man, I have sat in all of the above, I suppose, over the years. And it also depends on, I suppose, the availability. So if I had my choice,
Mm,
I guess it would depend on what it is. I think the more familiar I am with the presenter and the topic, probably there's probably a correlational relationship with how close, like the proximity I have with the So if it's like one of my friends presenting, I've sat in the front row. So if it's someone I know, or if it's a
mm.
topic I'm really excited about to learn, and I also think, if we're all being candid here, there's been times where like, well, I'm not so sure about this particular talk. It's something I don't know a lot about. I'm not familiar with the presenter. I might sit in the back. So,
Right, right. Absolutely. Preserve the right to go like grab a CEU or go to a different session for that, for sure. I've always
yeah,
been a sit in the front kind of person. I don't know why, but
yeah,
I don't know. There's something
yeah.
about making eye contact, like being a presenter and knowing how like, it's pretty intimidating, but you see that friendly face making eye contact and smiling back, and you're like, oh, the world is just good. I don't
Mhm.
know. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I went to the Verbal Behavior Conference in April, and I sat kind of. It's a really cool venue. It's a cool conference, more generally, but so they have actual tables as well as chairs, so it's nice to,
Mm,
so you can have your laptop up. It's not like sitting literally in your lap like it is sometimes at an ABAI. And I sat pretty front and center, and I had the table in front of me, so I was able to make notes and be a good audience member, as to the extent to which I, was able to do so. So yeah, I understand that for sure.
nice. It's I'm always the I try to like close my laptop and take manual notes, so like I'm not distracted by email, but I'm the person sitting next to people who's like, I'm passing notes to them, asking questions, I'm like leaning over whispering. So full
Oh yeah,
disclosure.
yeah. I know.
I
Yes.
can be annoying, but pleasantly annoying.
Sure, sure.
But I need someone to like share an experience with. And I think that
Yep.
comes back to the idea of like having casual conversations, like shared experience and learning feels like the most powerful thing we do as human beings.
Indeed.
But tell me about your behavioral observations podcast. And I'm still just blown away by like 3.5 million downloads. But like what I'm really curious about is like what have been your highest highs and your lowest lows on that journey?
Yeah. Wow. There's been a lot of the former, I suppose. So it's hard to pick. So I suppose most recently it would be one of the coolest things that it's been an outcome of the podcast is the relationship with the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis that was the brainchild of Dr. Linda LeBlanc. And
Mhm.
so we've been doing this Inside Java series podcast for the last couple of years, actually. We just published the
Mm.
12th in the series, which has been a lot of fun. Her term as the editor-in-chief is coming to a close. And
Yep.
I've met Dr. John Barrero. I had lunch with him in Boston at ABAI, and he is just a seriously nice guy. And anyway, he's really excited about continuing it. Thank goodness. So I'm glad. I'm glad he's listened to the occasional behavioral observations episode, and
Mm.
so I'm excited to have that continue. One of the things that was an outcome of that is that I was invited to there's a dinner that's hosted at every ABA, and I didn't know about
Mm.
this until recently. And I don't go to every single ABA either, so um, but it's a dinner put on by SAAB, which publishes Java and the Journal of the Experimental Analysis of Behavior as well.
Mm.
And so it's the editors in chief and a lot of people on the editorial boards, and and some of those people will bring their grad students as well. So it's this just big milieu of the a lot of the really productive and current names in behavioral research and practice. More
Mm.
tilted towards research, of course, given that these are research journals.
Mhm.
But it was a real moment where like, this is definitely like, I feel like I don't belong. I don't have a PhD. I'm not a scientist, practicing scientist in the research sense. Um, in the publication sense, if you will. Uh, but it was cool to be there, and I met a ton of people, and both Linda and John, and there's a lot of speech making and stuff like that. Linda and John gave me a couple of shout outs when they were presenting to the group and whatnot. Yeah, it was incredible. That's definitely one of many I could have chosen as a highlight. There's been a bunch. As far as lowest lows, I get to talk into a microphone at home with lots of cool people. And so I'm really struggling to pick a lowest low, to be perfectly honest with you, Jonathan. I guess, yeah, so I really don't know what a good answer to that would be. I would say that, this is kind of personal, but I'll share it anyway, I guess. But when the podcast first started, when I first started it, there were some folks in my family were like, "What is this? You're spending a lot of time on it, and you know, um, is it worth it? Because you're spending a lot of energy on this." And
Mm.
and it's like, um, and I really felt strongly that it was worth the investment,
Mm.
and so I kind of stuck to my convictions, which is kind of unusual for me. I'm kind of a people pleaser, so
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But I guess the one time I did. It's like, no, this is the right course for me right now, and I feel that the amount of time and attention is worthwhile, even if it comes at a um, even if it, means, working evenings and weekends and things like that. And I've since been able to kind of reshuffle responsibilities and whatnot, so it doesn't take as much of a bite as out of my personal family time. But for a while there, it was like, is this really worth it? So there was a lot of those kind of tough conversations with the family, particularly with my wife. Um, and yeah, so we've been able to make it work and have behavioral observations kind of fit into my other professional activities.
It's amazing, and I totally agree with you. Like, getting to have amazing conversations with amazing people, like there's nothing better than this. Wait, it's really easy to like reflect back at like 3.5 million downloads, so clearly been, I would guess, successful beyond any measure. But like, do you, as we think about goal setting, right, and especially as leaders think about setting goals for their organizations or for personal development, like, had you set out, like when you started the podcast, to set specific goals and say, I'm going to be successful when I hit X or achieve Y? Or was it I've got conviction around this and I'm going to dig in and just get after it?
Yeah, I think it's probably the latter.
Mm.
I never, because in podcasting, there's you don't get a plaque, or no one comes with like the Publishers Clearinghouse check to your door once you hit a certain number of downloads. You might need to put a Wikipedia reference to that in the show notes for the non perhaps for younger listeners, but
I like it.
um,
Yes.
yeah. So yeah, there's no, but so it's gratifying to get downloads, but it's not like I've earned like $1 a download or something like that. And I'm lighting cigars with $100 bills. Um, so I did always, I always had the conviction that, um, it's interesting you use that word, because I think it's a good fit here. I always knew that there was an audience for this podcast, and that might be weird for some members of the audience to listen to, depending on where they are on their timeline in this
Mm.
business. Now, I would imagine most people who are owning ABA businesses are probably closer to the in more senior areas in the field, whereas my audience is probably skewed a lot younger. So maybe
Hmm.
make more sense for your audience than mine. But at the time, when I started behavioral observations, there was no active ABA or behavior analytic podcast at all. There were people who started and stopped. So I when I first discovered podcasts, I was like, these things are awesome. So I started listening to podcasts about like my, sports teams and other
Yeah.
areas of interest and things like that. And I spent a lot of time driving around in the car, across rural New England, visiting schools and other places. And, I just couldn't find something that I wanted to listen to in this line of work. And I was thinking, wow, I'm wasting all this time just kind of driving around, flipping through the radio dial or listening to,
Yeah.
podcasts that are, that are fun and interesting, but aren't ultimately like, I could be like learning stuff, and so I guess that's a backdoor way of, describing how how I thought to do the podcast in the first place. And, yeah, so there wasn't there wasn't something like that at the time, and it kind of led me to think, well, maybe I can do something like this. And I had a buddy of mine who was super techie and also very enthusiastic, and so he kind of helped me we kind of together discovered the process of how to produce a podcast, which at the time was, I would say that the response effort was a lot higher at that time. Right now, like, you can download the Anchor app and have a podcast up and going in an hour. So, which is great, and but anyway, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, so it's been a fun ride for sure.
I mean, like, I know like so many of listeners on this podcast are entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs, hoping to start a practice. Like, what you did is the pure definition of entrepreneurship. And when I say pure definition, I mean, you said there's a gap in the world. There's something that does not exist. And I'm going to be crazy enough to think I'm going to make that exist, probably to the chagrin of many out there. Right. Like, and that's what that's part of the hard part of being an entrepreneur. It's like channeling a little bit of this inner crazy that I can do something that hasn't existed before and fill a niche and provide value. There's so much power in that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the observation. I remember, I remember chatting with Greg Hanley. Kind of, this wasn't on the podcast, but and he said it a lot more, I guess, deftly than I'm about to. But I suppose to paraphrase, like, we were joking around about how I cold emailed him out of the blue. And for a long time, I had to tell people what a podcast was before inviting them to come on a podcast. So it's like, it'd be like, podcast.
No, wait, you got to tell people? Like, explain
absolutely.
podcast.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if he was one of them or not, but, and I'm not saying this to be ageist or anything like that either, but, especially as someone with, more gray hair than not, but, that some of, quite frankly, when I've interviewed people who are, especially early on, like, podcasting now is a household term, and it wasn't, I guess, 6 or 7 years ago. So anyway, so I remember emailing him, say, "Hey, my name's Matt. I got this podcast that's coming out. It hadn't even been out yet." And so, like, Greg I think he was trying to pay me a compliment, and he was like, he's like, I'm trying to keep this PG. But basically he's like, it took a lot of stones to do that, to call up people out of the blue, and like people are like, who the hell is this guy? Matt who, and again, I'm highly paraphrasing here to make this family friendly, but it's kind of funny.
Oh my gosh, that's extraordinary. Well, again, like another behavior of an entrepreneur is just being willing to pick up the phone or send a cold email and convince people to do something. I'm sure everyone answers your emails and picks up the phone now when you call. Wait, I want to get when I recently, you did an episode on the behavior analysis of lying, and oh man, this is just fascinating to me. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so that was an interview I did with a really neat guy named Dr. Corey Stocco, who I got to meet in person at ABAI at said SAAB dinner.
Mhm.
He's super neat guy, and yeah, so uh, I'm gonna probably do a terrible job of paraphrasing the work that he and his colleagues done, but they've done some original research in the area of the like kind of conceptual and some empirical testing about around the concept of lying, and so they made these kind of
Mm.
these experimental analogs, which is a fancy way of saying they create these fake situations where kids were put in a situation where they they could lie if they wanted to. Uh, and
Mm.
I won't go into the details, and he goes through the details pretty thoroughly in the podcast of that episode. And I can send you the link if you wanted to include that in your show notes.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, it's really fascinating, and some of the findings and some of the background conceptual work that he shared with me in the general area of deception, if you will,
Mm.
is pretty interesting. And a lot of the research suggests that, and this won't come as a surprise to anyone with kind of common experiences to draw upon, is that lying usually occurs when there is some sort of transgression, some sort of behavioral transgression that someone wants to cover up, and they want to avoid
Mm.
the aversives that come along with engaging in that transgression. So
Mm.
um, so that so yeah, so it's just it's pretty cool. One of the things I really enjoyed about that episode is that my background's in experimental psychology, so I'm and that is and that was back when I went to my undergrad and grad school at a time where there were no standalone behavior analytic departments.
Mm.
Again, something that is probably news to a lot of younger listeners. And right now there's all these standalone ABA programs, and at the time it was very difficult to get behavior analytic training because they were hidden in these like psychology departments
Mm.
across the
Mm.
United States and in Canada. But anyway, one of the things I kind of have some nostalgia for behavior analysis being under the umbrella of psychology is that
Mhm.
is using behavior analytic conceptual and research tools to under to examine everyday phenomena
Mm.
of lying
Mhm.
being and this would be lying is a perfect example of that. Why do people lie? Why do people tell the truth? What are how does that what are the reinforcers and aversives that kind of influence those verbal repertoires.
Mm.
And so I think there's a lot of things like that we could still explore.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that's kind of a bummer about being kind of siloed in the autism industrial complex that we find ourselves in. There's so much attention going towards that, rightfully so. That which in other words, what I'm not saying is we should not do that. We should. It's more of a
Mhm.
yes and instead of a yeah but, I guess.
The autism industrial complex. That evokes like specific imagery. But what I'm fascinated by is, tell me if I get this right. Lying, the function of lying is avoidance, and the antecedent is usually some transgression of behavior.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. It's like, I don't know, I have 3 kids and they get assigned various chores. Sometimes the chores are easier to shirk if they're not, because there's not
Mm.
the permanent product may be variable, if you will.
Mm.
We have a cat, and 3 times a week, we've decided. I have 3 kids, so we've decided that 3 times a week the cat box needs to be emptied and
Mhm.
or changed or cleaned or whatever. Um, and they're actually pretty honest when they don't do it, and they. Um, but you can imagine the scenario where they say, "Oh, yes, I did," when they didn't do it. And so lying in that case
Mhm.
would be that the function of that would be to avoid whatever grief we would give them based off of them
Mm.
not doing their chores essentially. So that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
There's there's a lot of rule governance involved, I think as well, but I think those broader questions like moral development and things like that, I mean, that's kind of an old-timey or old-fashioned term, but
Mm.
what how do we how do we how do those repertoires get developed and shaped over time? You could look at the same thing about,
Mm.
concepts like impulsivity and all sorts of other things
Mhm.
that are, there's a lot more work on impulsivity in behavioral science broadly, so there's a lot of work on that in like the delayed discounting world. And, there's some
Mm.
pretty good behavioral economic models of impulsivity that are out there.
Mm.
Those questions were all asked and to a large extent answered um, in behavior analytic laboratories. So it's those kind of
Mm.
human nature questions, I think, that I would love more exploration of from a behavior analytic lens, as opposed to something that appeals to stuff that's more so grounded in hypothetical constructs.
Mm. Yeah. Well, how do you prepare to interview some of these legends in our field, the Jonathan Tarbachs and Greg Hanleys and others?
Well, I would start off by saying that a lot of these people are so down to earth, and sometimes you hear of stories of people like, well, I met so and so at a conference, and then they were a real, bleepity bleep, you know. There's that saying, "Never meet your heroes," right? And uh, I almost to a person have found completely the opposite. Um,
Mm.
you know, so and I think there's an added um, wind at my back, because you're asking someone to talk about something they're so insanely interested in. They've devoted their lives to
Mm.
studying it,
Mm.
right? So you're going to get some enthusiasm out of just about anybody
Mhm.
when you ask them
Mm.
questions about their life's work, right? So there's I feel so I think from that standpoint, it's my job as the interviewer is is easier than it would be to say to
Mhm.
interviewing a politician, and getting them to go on record about some thorny issue or something like that. So I'm not trying to
Yeah.
wheedle information out of anybody, or I'm not like a prosecutor or something like that. Uh, so there's a lot of stuff going in my favor, and a lot of these people are just incredibly down to earth, and they want the audience to know what they're doing. They want to, a lot of people want to communicate successfully with the audience, and they've got a message
Mhm.
they want to convey. Well, here's something too that to consider. With regard to, if I added up the downloads for all my Hanley episodes, it's easily over. I apologize. There's UPS deliveries and there's a construction going on at my house. So this is going to be, and I have two dogs. So, um,
All good.
but anyway, so, these folks, again, they're incredibly down to earth. They want you to do well. They want to convey, their information, and coming on behavioral observations is an opportunity for them to talk to thousands and thousands of behavior analysts.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
if you think of how many times someone will actually read a Java article, I have an issue. I can't reach it, but I can, about 5 feet away from me is the latest issue of Java, and it's the size of a
Mhm.
textbook. It's literally like an inch and a half thick, um, and not everybody. And what, there's like 50 or 60,000 board certified behavior analysts right now. I've lost
Mhm.
count. They're not all going to read I would shudder to think of what the numbers are in terms of the people who read the articles. It's probably low. And to be perfectly honest with you, Jonathan, I don't read all the articles, but I do look through and kind of see what's going on and whatnot. It's kind of like I look at the pictures, if you will,
Yeah, yeah.
But but it's not so my big point is that, if I write an article in Java, it's probably going to be read by low triple digit numbers of people.
Mm.
If someone comes on behavioral observations, their message is going to be heard by, upwards of, 5, 8, 10,000 people, depending on the topic and the guest, sometimes and more over time, but that's like within the first, week to 30 days or so, so it's a force multiplier in terms of communication within the field. So that's another incentive for someone to want to come on the show and talk about the stuff that they're doing.
This is really interesting to me, because when we think about this idea of like dissemination, what you're doing is dissemination. Now you're also providing CEU events and education and all kinds of things we'll talk about in a moment. But like, tell me, as a podcast host who's reaching 8, 10, 15,000 people every episode, like, what do you feel is your responsibility to dissemination in our field?
I have thought about this a lot, and I honestly sometimes don't feel like the behavioral observations is disseminating. If it to the extent to which it disseminates within the field. Here's what I mean by that. It might disseminate kind of lesser known topics to practitioners in the field who didn't get that material in the first place. So, for example, whenever I have a guest on that is talking about precision teaching and the standard acceleration chart, it's not practiced. It's not taught anymore, unfortunately, unless you go to unless you go to specific programs or have a specific instructor who's, understands the value of looking at data in that way. It's not required for the exam, so that and it's always been kind of like this kind of boutique-y thing in our field. And it just, for various reasons, it never caught on to the mainstream of behavior analysis. And if you look in Java, I don't think, someone might catch me. This might not be, it's close enough to whether it's true or not, doesn't matter, but it's almost always true. But I don't think there's ever been a standard acceleration chart published in Java. I'm hoping I'm wrong about that, and if someone knows of one, I hope they reach out to me and let me know what it is. So it hasn't achieved any type of mainstream relevance, unfortunately, because I think it's a powerful tool. I say unfortunately for a reason. And so when I have people on talking about this, I feel like I'm disseminating within the practitioner base. And I think that's the same thing. I started talking about acceptance and commitment therapy before it became kind of cool to do so. I'm trying to pat myself on the back. I just kind of stumbled on it, and got a chance to interview some big people in that area of work. And even though now I would say ACT is certainly becoming more and more mainstream, it's succeeding way more than, say, like precision teaching has. And so, but when I bring topics like that on, I feel like I'm achieving some level of dissemination. I don't really feel like I'm disseminating outside of behavior analysis. Every once in a while, I've gotten like 1 or 2 emails over the years saying, hey, I had this one guy, he's like, hey, I'm a plumber. My girlfriend is a behavior analyst and she listens to your show. And sometimes it's on when we're driving around the car. And I've learned a lot from it. I'm like, awesome. That's like, one of the coolest things that, the coolest emails I've gotten.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Point totally taken. It's sort of dissemination within the field, but it's not true dissemination. ABA practice owners, are billing and insurance issues getting you down? Well, let me tell you, Element RCM is your answer. Element provides world-class revenue cycle management services, contracting, credentialing, authorizations, billing, and more. Element's your partner, so you can focus on what you love to do, providing the highest quality services to your families and clients. Element's a preferred partner of the Behavioral Health Center of Excellence, and its founders have nearly 20 years of experience owning and operating successful ABA organizations. They understand you. They know that every dollar counts, that integrity is everything. Element works with any practice management system. And Element's not a vendor, they're your partner. So find out more and take a free revenue cycle assessment at elementrcm.ai.
Yeah.
Like my follow-up question to that, and this comes from, I mean, I'm not a behavior analyst, right? And I'm not nearly smart enough to be. And I've been in the field over 10 years. And when I first learned about like the power of ABA, like you can change someone's behavior by reshaping their environment, I knew I could never go back. And I've used the analogy of like the Matrix and Keanu Reeves taking a red pill. But like, so I feel this like strong desire to help the rest of the world experience what I've experienced and what it's done, just generally in my life and opening up my eyes. But like what are your thoughts on how we help the rest of the world find out about ABA?
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna get to a point where people will be like, ABA is gonna be a brand name for understanding behavioral phenomenon more generally. I'm not. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen, to be perfectly candid with you. You know what's interesting is there's this book that was published recently called Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of it. And he's made the rounds on, I haven't, just to be, I guess, point out here, I have not read the book, but I've heard him interviewed in a couple of places, and on a couple of different podcasts. And I will be prepared to revise my opinion if I do end up reading the book and developing some other type of appreciation for it. But the book is about, if I'm not mistaken, about various aspects of behavior change and things like that. And in these interviews, James Clear is citing all these kind of like social psychologists and cognitive psychologists about all these behavior change strategies, and citing these studies as if they're like groundbreaking and things like that. And I'm like, and some of the examples I'm listening to him explain, it's like, wow, we've known that for almost a century. Like, so if we haven't disseminated by now, I don't know what it will take. But here's where so that's my glass half empty view of dissemination. My glass half full is, I guess, view on dissemination is it's not going to occur through people learning about behavior analysis. It's not like they're going to get like, they're not going to see an infographic on Facebook and like, oh, I get it now. That's what causes everything to, it's not, that's not going to happen. What's going to happen, to the extent to which ABA becomes, materially disseminated, it will occur through entrepreneurial problem solving. So it's kind of come back to, that word entrepreneur came up, and that, it's going to, it's that process that you described, someone observing a hole in the marketplace, if you will, and noticing, well, I think I know what will solve that problem, some sort of behavioral solution, one of the, so I'll give you an example. I think would be, I still think it's got a long road ahead of it to where it's mainstream in terms of, the intervention of choice, but, or standard of care, I suppose. But there's a robust literature in whether it's alcohol or substance use disorders called contingency management. If you haven't heard of that, it's remarkable what some of these contingency management interventions have accomplished. And so the I guess the Reader's Digest version of contingency management basically is that, what they'll do is, and usually these things are administered out of like hospital or university settings, but if someone enters a contingency management intervention for a substance use disorder, what happens is that um, they go in for frequent testing. You need data, right, for this to all work, right? And whether it's so if they are tested clean, they participants receive contingent rewards for maintaining levels of sobriety. There's a huge literature in the efficacy. And if I'm not mistaken, from what I understand, it blows away everything else. Now it's costly to some extent, but I don't know how I don't know if there's been any comparisons about what that would cost relative to like what a 90-day inpatient treatment would be. That's got to be ridiculously expensive. But
Yeah.
there was an interesting episode in the Inside Java series. I forget what number in the series it was, but I interviewed a guy named Dr. Jesse Dallery from the University of Florida, and they actually put together and they created an app, and they also created like they designed a smartphone based sensor where if you're, so they did a contingency management intervention to help people stop smoking. And so they had this thing you could blow in right into your phone. You just slapped it into the lightning port or the whatever it was. It would measure and it would be able to tell whether you've been smoking or not within a certain span of time. And they programmed this app to, I might get some of the details wrong here, but they programmed this app to send out notifications and essentially cue people to test, and the test was all mobile, right? So it's not like they had to go into like go into a hospital and like pee in a cup or anything, any of those things that are again, talk about barriers related to response effort. A lot of those barriers were eliminated. So they were able to help people stop smoking using a smartphone, an app, and this little device that goes along with it. That's potentially game changing, and I think there are a lot of other potential interventions like that. I'll give you another example. Like I'm in physical therapy right now for my shoulder. I have a shoulder impingement in my left shoulder, and which just means basically I can move this shoulder a lot less. My range of motion with this shoulder is terrible relative to this one, and when I try to move this one around at its extreme ranges, it starts to hurt. It's not fun. So my physical therapists have given me these like list of exercises to do and things like that. What's interesting though, there was no like they just say, how are your exercises going? Any of them hurt when you do it? And I'm like, no. And I'm like, I got really busy, and it was like a couple of days where I didn't do them. And like all of that to say is that, I think more effort could be done to get people to be cooperative with their exercise prescriptions, and therefore get people through therapy faster, and so like again, that's something that is a behavioral intervention waiting to happen, whether it's through contingency management or an app that just reminds people. You might start with something just really simple. Hey, did you do your, you have this PT app, and did you do your, this might already exist, and maybe I'm just going to a provider that's kind of behind the tech curve. But so I think it's things like that will so it's like almost the same answer to people like who ask the question. I love behavior analysis. I'm a BCBA. I don't want to work in autism. I want to do something different. That requires you to be entrepreneurial in nature, because you have to find your own application and be willing to pursue that independently. In other words, there's no insurance company right now that is hiring for a BCBA to help them to design this yet to be designed app to help people be more cooperative with whatever health regimes that are prescribed, right? So Aetna is not does not have an ad on LinkedIn Jobs. You have to go out and make that job. There's a great paper by Matt Normand and Carolyn Cohn. I've talked about it quite a bit on the podcast. I saw both of them at ABAI again, another ABAI reference, right? And I implored them to update it because of this article was originally published in 2013 in what was then the Behavior Analyst, which is now Perspectives on Behavioral Science. And they went through this. It's a really well thought out paper, and it's basically about it kind of talks about that question. I want to do something different in behavior analysis. What is it going to take to be able to find jobs elsewhere? So that's an extremely long-winded answer, I suppose, to my thoughts on dissemination. And so again, just to sum it up, in case anyone fell asleep in the last few minutes, I think we're not going to, ABA itself is not going to become a household name unless you have autism. And it can have a household name that can go a couple different ways, and it's a whole nother kettle of fish. And to the extent to which we can achieve some meaningful level of dissemination, it's going to be through entrepreneurial type of problem solving of existing social problems.
I think that's really insightful. As Matt, as you described that, so I actually used an app this probably a year or two ago called Stick. I don't know if you're familiar with it, STICKK.
Yes,
and it's all about sticking to your goals. And the way it works is you set a goal for yourself, and then you can have an accountability buddy, someone that email updates will go out to. And but the really interesting thing, so my goal was, I think my goal was I'm not going to eat after 9 p.m. at night, right? Because sometimes I got me a sweet tooth, and I'm going to go load up on sugar and just make the bad choices we make when we're kind of tired at the end of the day. So I set a 30-day goal that I would not eat after 9 p.m. But here's a really interesting mechanic. You have to select, if you don't make your goal, an organization that gets donated to. And I remember actually hearing the founder of the app on a podcast that talked about the most powerful donation is to an organization that you don't like. And so I'm not going to review my political party, but I picked a different political party, and I set that, and guess what? 30 days, I crushed it. I absolutely crushed it. And then within a week,
you don't want the American Nazi Party or something like that.
Exactly, right? Yeah. And so I was I guess I was just deathly afraid. And then I did it sometime later, and I don't know, I only made it halfway through, but it's because I think I had chosen the Children's Defense Fund or something I really believed in. So I don't know, man. But it was really neat.
There's an actual example of that in a pre-internet example of that in Whaley and Malot's Fundamentals of Behavior Analysis textbook, the second edition, that I read as a sophomore or junior in college in the mid 90s. So again, circling back to my earlier point, that strategy has been around for decades, right? And that's just using simple avoidance, So it's so that's an application. There's nothing complicated about the arrangement of the Stick app. It's just the engineering of the app and making sure it works, and all the technological handshakes between making sure the app runs properly and whatnot. But yes, I've heard of that app, and from what I've heard the same thing too. You get more behavior change out of avoiding the unpleasant outcome as opposed to achieving the reinforcing outcome.
Bingo. But then the behavior, at least my behavior, didn't maintain once the punishment or outcome changed.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really appreciate about your podcast is you provide like education, like CEUs, which is such an amazing service to your listeners. And I'm curious, like, what are the topics of CEUs that have been most popular, and what do you think that says about the needs in our field?
Well, I think that so some of the more popular CEUs oftentimes have some of the more popular guests associated with them. So, like I think,
Mhm.
um, and there's a couple of different confounding variables, I suppose. So when I have an ethics CEU with Pat Fryman, right, and so Pat Fryman
Mm.
is like the rock star of our field, of course. Everyone wants to hear him talk. He's
Yeah.
he can open up the yellow pages and recite them into a microphone, and it would draw a crowd. People would stand around to
It's
hear
so
it.
true. It's so true.
I would, and he's a neat guy. Again, one of the just one of the things that one of the fun outcomes about this podcast is just being able to meet and develop relationships with a lot of these people. And yeah, so Pat is very popular. He's featured in a couple of different CEUs. Um, Greg Hanley stuff is popular for sure. So we've done a lot of CEU stuff with the whole, practical functional assessment approach.
Mm.
And I also think that people also want, so it's interesting that like the board requires us to have some number of ethics and some number of supervision CEUs every cycle. The
Mm.
supervision ones are optional if you're not supervising. The rules have changed a couple of times, but I believe that the way they are currently,
Mm.
if you're in the business of supervising people, you need to take supervision CEs. Makes sense. Um,
Mm.
but everyone needs ethics, and so the ethics and supervision ones do sell well. So there's that.
Mm.
So I think that so to answer your question about what does it say about our field, I would say is that people want to listen to the people that they like, and
Mm.
people need ethics CEUs. See,
Yeah.
so sometimes
That's a good. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, if you go to ABAI and you see an ethics talk going on, usually it's like a lot of people are cramming in there. It's like, oh, I got to get my ethics CEU. It's almost like, it's like, yay, I'm gonna go my, I don't know why. It's like it's one of those things.
Oh, it's amazing. Another entrepreneurial niche, dude. Like the
Yeah,
most
I know.
powerful.
Like, let's make ethics fun again. It's the CEU equivalent of Brussels sprouts. Even though I actually like Brussels
Right.
sprouts, but I'm kind of odd in that
Yes.
regard. So,
As long as Brussels sprouts have butter and bacon, I'll tell you what. Like
there you
that's
go.
there.
Yeah,
But that feels like
There-
cheating to me. I don't know. But yeah, butter and bacon with your ethics CEUs, right?
there you go.
Right. I like how you're like reflecting. You have some really meaningful reflections on our field, and I'm curious. Like, let's look 5 to 10 years out, and what are like 3 bold predictions that you have for our field?
Yeah, I don't have predictions. I have worries. I suppose. you know, uh, I get this sometimes from other guests. They answer the question they want to answer. And so they answer the question the way in which they imagined it would be asked or something. No, I'm just kidding. But so I don't. So a couple of things. Well, one is so I should say at the outset, I don't do any insurance funded work. My
Mhm.
clinical work is all consultation to schools. Uh, um, but I have had some exposure to that world, and I also know it just by observation of being in a field where most practitioners are doing insurance funded work. So uh, I uh, I think and our field's exploding so rapidly that there's a lot of problems that are
Mhm.
concomitant with that explosive growth, and one of them is that there's no real you know yeah we, I think the field needs to get and I know that people are already pursuing this, but we need to do better in terms of getting quantitative measures of quality,
Mhm.
quality of services. Are sometimes you hear these stories of these kids being in treatment for years and years and years and years, and they're still learning,
Mm,
like, or people still trying to present trials of, like, basic receptive
mm,
discrimination, and it's like, well, they haven't made progress in this, you know, but you're getting the insurance reauthorization, like, what's going on here, and um,
mm,
that's a huge concern, and and I can see, one of the other things that I don't just know if a concern, and I'm more of a curiosity. I just interviewed someone about the whole concept of values-based care,
mm,
and
mhm,
you know, I think having, I think at a certain point, funders will start to see, okay, are these, what are the ways in which these clients are making progress, and if they're, and are there objective ways to measure their progress? Like, you could send them your graphs. One of the things we don't have, and this is perhaps an argument for the standard acceleration chart. Um, but when you make your graphs in Excel, or you're doing it through Central Reach or your Rethink or whatever, all the graphs, the 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 critics of the, what we might call conventional graphing, will call those stretch and fill graphs, because you can play around with the axes,
mhm,
and make them
mm,
show different things, you know. Um,
mm,
so again, that's just a bit of an aside, but I guess where I'm going is that there's, if there's not a standardized way of measuring, at a certain point, insurance companies want to take a harder look at those things and say, hey, what the hell is going on here? Are these kids really making progress? Or, I don't know. And is that going to impact their willingness to
mm,
provide services to, to people who really need it, So,
mhm,
um, so I think that that's a worry. I don't know how that's going to play out in the next 5 years. I hope we do.
mm,
My wish, it's not necessarily a prediction, it's more of a wish that we do have some standardization as it relates to how to measure quality and outcomes and things like that. Um,
mm,
so I think that would be my biggest thing. Um, I
mm,
know also there's a lot of talk about, like, the social model of disability as opposed to the medical model of disability. And
mm,
those are important issues to discuss. It's one of those things, though, like, if you push this, if you take the logic of the social model of disability to its extreme, at a certain point,
mm,
someone's like, well, this is a social issue, not a medical issue, and again, I worry about, like,
mm.
the worst, the least charitable interpretations of these otherwise very well intended, I guess, endeavors, right? You know,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
what happens when the dog catches the car, right? And it's like, oh, well, this is just a social problem. Well, we don't provide medical treatment for social problems, like, maybe I'm paranoid. I don't know, Jonathan, but those are two, that's something that's been on my mind recently as well.
I had never thought about that idea of like the dog catching the car and social mobility or social models versus medical models. Oh, that's another thing that I'm going to put in my like worry bucket.
Sorry.
I know
I
it's you know what I have to
and
Matt. I always have to come back to like Mark Twain saying of like that like most of the things I've worried about in my life never end up happening. That's what
yeah.
I'm channeling.
Yeah, yeah, and you and Mark Twain are likely right in this case, but and again, I just want to be abundantly clear. I don't think that I'm not saying that to mock the these types of conversations, or
Sure.
to say that they're unimportant or whatever. I'm just I'm maybe just being paranoid, I guess.
Well, Matt, what's one thing that every ABA business owner should start doing, and one thing they should stop doing?
Okay, well, let me start with the latter. I don't own an ABA practice, so I wouldn't be in the position to tell people what to stop doing, because I can only imagine. I've seen, I've got, I filled in for a behavior analyst who was on maternity leave a few years ago for about 6 weeks, 6 or 8 weeks or whatever, and I saw what it takes to run, or I saw just a fraction of what it takes to run an ABA agency. So I'd be hard pressed to, from especially from like an operation standpoint, to opine on that, because it's so utterly complex that but what I would say from a marketing perspective, I would say, if someone wants to grow their practice at a certain point, we need to become savvy marketers, especially if you're in an environment where there's some level of saturation of ABA providers. I know that might sound weird, but with wait lists and things like that, but we will get to a point where there's some market saturation, and you're going to have, ABA centers like across the street from each other, like right, and
like dentists,
much like the dentists, exactly. So I would encourage practice owners to really, and this might be depending on how big a practice you have. Some of this stuff could be DIY. Some of the stuff you'd probably be better spent to hire out to do this. But to get your your kind of digital marketing game down. One of the things I've learned through this, the podcasting process, a little bit about how the digital marketing world works, and what is what kind of website a business should have on, and what should be on that website. So like a lot of times, like on a website, like for some businesses, it might be like all about applied behavior analysis, or all about the clinical director and their degrees and things like that. Really, what a parent wants is they want to know how their pain points can be addressed and resolved. So it's like you want to convey a message of how you can help them, and you don't help them by rattling off your CV. You help them by doing things like letting them know what your hours are, what insurance you accept, things like those lines. You want to convey the benefits, not the features of the product, if you will.
That's right.
And so there's certainly an art and a science to digital marketing. Also includes things like starting an email list, and cultivating an email list, and then communicating with the members of your list, the people on your list, in such a way where most of the interactions you have are giving interactions, meaning you're sharing knowledge and stuff like that. And every once in a while there might be an ask, but for the most part, and I try to model that with my my website's a bit of a mess, but the email list that I maintain is I try to model. I send out show notes to the episodes, so anyone who signs up for the email list, excuse me, automatically gets the show notes zipped out to them within a few days of the episode going live. So you don't even have to go to the website, and so I do that, and then every once in a while I'll send out what I call an ask. So if I have a sale, or if I'm tasked with marketing a particular conference or something like that, I'll send a standalone email that says, "Hey, I got this big sale going on for CEUs, blah 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 blah. Check it out." And I feel like I can do that because I've put in the capital, if you will, the goodwill of sharing the information, the show notes over time. So I think there are ways in which we can learn from those folks in the digital marketing space to to get savvier with those sorts of things. I've had a guy named Rich Brooks. He's been on the podcast 2 or 3 times to talk about these things, and he's just a brilliant marketing mind. And to that end too, I would say, again, I don't want to lengthen anyone's to-do list, but one thing would be helpful is to start creating content. Doesn't it, which is not to say that you need to start a podcast or YouTube channel or anything like that. But rather, you could write, like parenting tips or things like that, like short little, 300 word, blog posts, for example. And again, those are things that you can have on your website. And when you update your website pretty frequently, Google likes that. When Google likes your website, that becomes, when people say, oh, I need ABA in Sacramento, California, or in, Wichita, Kansas, or whatever, you're more likely to rank on the first page of the Google results. So that's content you can zip out to your email list. So it's a whole process, but I think broadly speaking, getting a solid digital marketing game is well worth the investment.
Absolutely. I like that idea of sort of thinking about like keeping your website live, and there's actually an add-on to Chrome where it's like this app. I think it's called Uber Success. I'll drop it in the show notes. That'll actually show your quote unquote website domain authority score.
Oh, wow.
And I think it's a number of 1 to 100, right? And it's based on everything from how often you update it to how many backlinks are there from other websites to other things. So for business owners out there who have a website and install that app, it's been really interesting for me. I just learned about it about 8-9 months ago, just to see
cool.
test the kinds of things to do it. But you're absolutely right. As you post content and helpful things that are building trust with your brand, it drives more people to want to come and find you. And speaking of which,
people
Matt,
want to know, like, and trust. Those are some key attributes to shoot for. There was one other thing I was going to say on that topic, but it escapes me right now. But it's fine.
Where can people find you online?
Behavioralobservations.com. And same thing with most of the socials, so facebook.com/behavioral observations, Instagram, behavioral observations, Twitter, it's some absurd, it's like @behavior podcast or something like that, because behavioral observations was too lengthy. So that's pretty easy to find online. So
nice. And I can't recommend it highly enough. It's a fantastic podcast. And if you like listening to building better businesses, you're going to like behavioral observations. So Matt, are you ready for our hot take questions?
Oh yeah.
So you're on your deathbed. What's one thing you want to be remembered for?
This sounds kind of cheesy, but I would love people to just think it would be nice if people thought of me as a good guy. It's kind of like that's probably as simple as I can put it. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your most important self-care practice?
So I got a couple different hobbies, and I think that's something that is important. It's been important to me. So I love mountain biking. I'm going to the Kingdom Trails in Vermont this weekend. If anyone in the Northeast who rides mountain bikes is familiar with the Kingdom Trails, it's a really cool place to ride. I'm really looking forward to that. So I've got a friend who has a place up there. It's a bunch of guys. We're gonna go ride bikes and have a bunch of fun up there. So that's awesome. I like to pretend I can play guitar on a good day. I see you've got a guitar there in the background. That's cool. And I live in northern New England, so you have to have an outdoor winter activity if you want to survive what seems like 8 months of winter a year. So I like snowmobiling and skiing and things like that. So and it's for me, it's been gratifying to have stuff to do that has nothing to do with behavior analysis or anything like that. All my friends that I spend time with outside of work or what have you don't know anything about behavior analysis other than what I tell them. So my friends are either like in sales or they're in manufacturing or whatever, just random normal jobs,
Yes, indeed. Well, we share a mutual passion for mountain biking. So that's
nice.
That's one of the small handful of things that puts me in my flow state. And So when you come out to Colorado, we're going to go get after it on bikes.
Oh yeah.
And when I make it out to Vermont, New Hampshire, this Kingdom Trail sound pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's awesome. Good stuff.
What's your favorite song?
Red Barchetta by Rush. I'm a huge Rush fan. So I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. It's that's like one of those things. It's like a litmus. It's like there's no people like, I kind of like them. It's usually like I can't stand them, or I have every album and no other birthdays.
It's true. And you know what? So I love Rush. I don't know all their birthdays, but I agree with you on that. And I think Rush is like a gift, and I'm on record saying they are a gift to the world. And I'm spilling some out right now for Neil Peart, who passed away.
Still gets me that I'll never see them live again.
Yes. Crushing. They're amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Matt, if you could give your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Yeah. I would say find something active you like to do. Like I discovered a lot of these kind of like activities, if you will, physical activities, kind of later in life. I always did them, but not nearly as frequently as I do now. And, I suppose I have more time to do it now, whereas, 10 or 15 years ago, I was knee deep in like little kids running around the house. My kids are all teenagers now. And, but regular exercise and physical activity was something I came to appreciate later. And if I, fortunately, I don't think it resulted in any deleterious health consequences yet. But I don't know. I sometimes wonder, like if I was, mountain biking 3 or 4 times a week, or whatever, doing some other type of physical activity or exercise involved in some sort of exercise regimen from 18 on until now, I might be in quite a bit of better shape, I suppose. But yeah, I would just say stress the importance of getting on that, and even when life is really busy, is to find some time for that sort of activity.
For sure. Well, if you could only wear one style of footwear, what would it be?
This is a tough one. So I would say, gosh, I love, it's gonna sound so bougie, but I'm kind of really picky about my shoes. So this is embarrassing. But so I love, I just discovered, I'm on my second pair now, but I love them, and they're obscenely expensive, but I love these running shoes called Hokas. They're like walking on clouds. They're unbelievably cushiony. They're fantastic. I love them. And so it's a toss up between that and Keens. I wear a lot of Keens. I'm on like my, I don't know. I can't remember what number pair I have, but I usually buy one pair and I wear them every day. Like that's like my work shoe, and I wear it every single day. Wear that same pair, and I wear them out and get a new pair. So it's just they're great. So I would say it's a toss up between those two.
I mean, the imagery that you call to mind, this idea of walking on clouds, is now I've got to figure out how to get some Hokas. That's phenomenal, Matt.
Until you see the price tag, it's like, maybe I don't need to walk on clouds today. Maybe I could, I'm just joking. But everything's expensive these days, so it's like
everything is expensive.
What the hell, It's like
I so appreciate you coming on the pod. This has been a ton of fun. Thanks for sharing your wisdom and time, Matt.
The pleasure's all mine.
What up, listeners? Hey, I got something for you. If you like my Building Better Businesses in ABA podcast, you're going to love the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Cicoria. So I recently met Matt at ABAI, and let me tell you, I was just an instant fanboy. Matt's the real deal. His pod is all about stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. So session 191 on his pod is on the behavior analysis of lying. That's right, lying. How awesome is that? Who does that? He also talks social skills, ACT, FAs, and so much more. His guests include Greg Hanley, Jonathan Tarbox, and other legendary names in our field. And as a BCBA, you can even get CEU credits through behavioral observations. You can find Matt and the Behavioral Observations podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast channel. Enjoy, friends.
Thanks for listening to Building Better Businesses in ABA podcast. Stay tuned for our next exciting episode. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. We value your feedback. Don't forget to follow us on social media at elementrcm.ai.